Hi, this is Len Furman, and welcome to Samuel Adler, a good man, a great life, an incredible role model. Part 4, attorney, community leader, and family man, 1946 to 1969. Most of the family today that remember Sam Adler knew him as Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam was a man of impeccable character. He abided by a strong set of morals and had a penchant for honesty. He set a standard for living that is unparalleled among most men today. I hope that just a little bit of his positive spirit can be conveyed to the younger generations of our family in this portrait of Sam Adler. We'll start with a recap of parts 1 to 3, Sam's early life. Sam grew up on the giant Adler dairy farm that his father Simon had purchased in Franklin Park, New Jersey in 1907. Sam was the fourth of 6 children and the first to go to college, where he was supposed to study agriculture. But Sam decided to become an attorney. He went to NYU Law School and passed the bar in 1925. He then set up his own law practice in New Brunswick, and in 1926, he quickly had success. By the age of 33 in 1935, Sam's rise from farm boy to prominent attorney was celebrated in this Home News article. Reading the last part of the article, Samuel Adler hasn't reached the top of the ladder yet, but he is climbing fast and exemplifies the adage that where there's a will, there's a way. At age 40, in 1942, Sam was at the pinnacle of his career and was on the front page of the newspaper, being appointed to a state position by the governor of New Jersey. But Sam turns down the governor's job. He volunteers as an enlisted man in World War II at age 40. Sam served 3 years with the 19th Bombardment Group and spent 7 months in Guam in 1944 and 45. Sam received a letter of commendation from the commander of the 19th upon leaving the service in July 1945. Colonel John A. Roberts wrote an extraordinary letter in which he alluded to Sam, an enlisted man, as being an equal. Roberts later rose to the rank of Brigadier General himself. And now, part 4, attorney, community leader, and family man, 1946 to 1969. In 1945, when Sam came home from Guam, he reopened his law office after 3 years away in the Army. From sergeant back to citizen, Sam is once again a prominent figure in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Here, he is interviewed about a telephone strike in 1947. Sam's comment about the ubiquity of telephones sounds remarkably like life in 2022. Said Sam in the article, "It has become so much a part of our daily life that being deprived of it is indeed a great handicap." And shortly after this, Sam becomes a family man. Sam had made a personal vow to get married if he made it home alive from Guam in World War II. Here we see a picture of Andersen Air Base, where in Guam, where Sam was stationed for 7 months at the end of 1944 and 1945. Sam's daughter Doris recalls the story of Sam's vow while he was in the jungles of Guam.
He always used to tell this story. I decided when I was in the jungles of Guam that if I got home alive, I would get married. And then he would point to me and go, "And this is what I have to show for it," which I always thought was very cute.
In 1947, Mazel Tov, Sam meets Ethel Feinberg, and they are married on January 19th, 1947. Doris tells a story about how Sam and Ethel got together.
I know he dated quite a bit. And in fact, Jack's aunt was a lovely woman from New Brunswick. And when I met her, she said one of the first things she said to me was, I went out on a date with your father. And I looked at her and I was thinking to myself, oh, she's a great lady. I wonder why you didn't like her. He had endless dates. He was a very, very eligible bachelor. But when his mother said, you know, Ethel Feinberg is living in New York, then why don't you look her up? So that's what he did. He looked her up, and she was just different, I guess, than most women. You know, she was very intellectually capable. I guess, you know, he met her family, and that was attractive. And I guess he was just very attracted to her for many reasons. I don't think it took them too long to get married and then have me.
And on June 3rd, 1948, Doris is born in New Jersey. And we see the announcement here on June 7th, 1948, in the New Brunswick Daily Home News. And here is a picture of Sam with baby Doris sometime around late 1948 or early 1949. And another picture with Sam and baby Doris. Next to Sam is his sister-in-law, his brother Isidore's wife, Dorothy. And also pictured on the right side of the picture is Sam's sister, Estelle, who is also my grandmother. During the summers in the 1950s, Ethel used to take Doris up to Canada where she had relatives, and Sam would then visit them and spend time with them as he took time off from the legal practice. We see the Home News documenting some of Sam's trips to Canada in 1952 and 1953. Doris talks about the summers in Canada.
My mother's family had a house in Laurentian Mountains. And my mother and I, from the time I was a year old, would go there for the summer. And my father would stay in New Brunswick. And then he'd come up at the end of the summer. He would drive up. I missed him so much in the summer. Oh. And he would write me poems and stories and send them in the mail. And they were so beautiful. I remember one of them was like Greenback the Frog, and it was a whole series. And then he'd make up like a little rhyme like, Greenback the Frog, don't jump off the log because you'll be a dish for Jerry the Catfish. I still remember that. When he came up and we really had time together, we went fishing a lot. He loved to fish.
And here's a picture sometime in the late 1950s. The children in the front are cousin Barry and Doris, and the adults from the left are cousin Norman from Philadelphia. Sam is in the back left, partially blocked, and right next to him is Ethel. And then we see B, and my parents are Lean and Stanley and Estelle, Stanley's mother and my grandmother. And here's another picture of Sam in the 1950s. From the left to right in the back, that's Ethel, my mother Arlene, Norma Abramson, Estelle, Dorothy Adler, Isidore's wife, and Gert. This picture was taken outside the Welton Street, New Brunswick home where Sandy and Stanley grew up. Sam also becomes a Jewish community leader after the war. In 1946, Sam was in charge of a delegation sent to Washington by the New Brunswick chapter of the Jewish war veterans to protest the action of the British in Palestine against the Jews. They were specifically protesting the British policy of refusing admittance to Jewish refugees into British-controlled Palestine. And we see in the bottom of the article on the right that Sam was in charge of the delegation. So I did some research and found out that this was a major rally in Washington. Here's a picture of the Jewish war veterans marching in Washington on July 15th, 1946. The Jewish War Veterans March was covered in nearly every newspaper in the country the next day on July 16th, 1946. And pictures like this one were on the front page of several newspapers across the country on July 16th, 1946. Later in the year, Sam addressed the Jewish war veterans in New Brunswick about the July protest in Washington. That article indicated that some of the delegates visited President Truman that day. As a leader of the New Brunswick delegation, I did some research to determine if Sam was possibly one of the delegates that met President Truman. The Truman Library archives display the time, date, and names of the Jewish war veterans from that rally that met with President Truman. Sam was not among them. Here we see a picture of the Jewish war veteran delegates meeting with President Truman at the White House on July 15th, 1946. Doing some further research, I found an incredible video of the rally, and I'm going to show you that video right now. Here's about a 20-second clip from a 5-minute video of the Jewish war veterans protest on July 15th, 1946. And we're about to see a man who might be Sam. As these people are marching here, look in the second row. In the second row on the right, the man with the tie, I believe that could be Sam. Now let's take a look a little closer at that picture and a picture of Sam during World War II. So on the left, we see a picture of Sam in uniform a couple of years earlier during World War II. And on the right, we see the picture of the man from the video. Is that Sam that we're seeing in this historical video? I will leave it to you to decide. Sam also became a leader in the Zionist Organization of America. In 1950, he was installed as the president of the local New Brunswick chapter of the Zionist Organization of America. 1 year later, in 1951, Sam became president of the New Jersey state group of the Zionist Organization of America. As part of that role, he helped lead an Israel bond drive effort in 1951. Here we see him standing in the middle in the back. In 1953, Sam headed the welcoming committee when Hubert Humphrey, who was a senator at the time, gave a speech at an Israel bond dinner in New Brunswick. Hubert Humphrey later went on to be a 1968 Democratic presidential candidate. And then in 1961, Sam was elected to the highest governing body of the Zionist Organization of America, the organization's National Executive Council. Sam was very likely present at the convention to see the speech of Governor Nelson Rockefeller. Nelson Rockefeller later became Vice President of the United States under Gerald Ford. Sam also remained active with the Jewish war veterans. And one solemn day in 1963, Sam was called upon to deliver a eulogy among a Jewish war veterans group for President Kennedy, who had been assassinated a few days earlier. As part of his eulogy covered in the home news, Sam said, "President Kennedy was a great leader and a great veteran." Sam's wife, Ethel, also was a volunteer for Jewish causes. Here we see her in the middle of this picture, volunteering for the United Jewish Appeal in 1964. In 1966, here we see an article discussing that Sam is president of the Jewish Federation. And as part of his role as president, he nominated his brother-in-law, Gertz, his sister Gert's husband, Morris Yakus, Barry's father, to be head of fundraising for the Jewish Federation in central New Jersey. Here we see Sam pictured at a Jewish Federation dinner in 1966. He is still president of the Jewish Federation at this time. And here we see Sam pictured again, providing funds to United Jewish Appeal in his role as Jewish Federation president, also in 1966. Now, while Sam was a leader in the Jewish community, he never actually had a bar mitzvah as a boy. Growing up on the farm in a rural area in the early 1900s, Sam had never had a Hebrew education, but in the 1960s, he was determined to learn Hebrew. And at age 65, he was called to the Torah to become a bar mitzvah. In Judaism, you can have a bar mitzvah at any time after you turn 13. All that's required is to be called to the Torah. Doris discusses how Sam learned Hebrew in his 60s.
When they lived on the farm, they didn't go to temple. They didn't have any kind of Jewish upbringing because they were brought up as Jews, and they could read and do whatever they wanted, but there was no temple near there. So he never learned to speak Hebrew. So he went back and started to study Hebrew, to learn Hebrew when he was in his 60s.
And Sandy discusses how the Adlers growing up on the farm never had a Hebrew education.
They never had a Hebrew education. None of them were bar mitzvahed except Uncle Sam when he was middle age, and older.
And Arlene recalls Sam's bar mitzvah.
We were in the temple and he read Torah. He was called up to do his bar mitzvah. It was a big deal. He made a big deal with my father that he's going to have his bar mitzvah because he never had a bar mitzvah. And it was just getting up and reading from the Torah. That's what a bar mitzvah is, right? On a Saturday morning, we were there.
Sam also held leadership positions in many other non-Jewish organizations. He became a leader in the Optimist Club in the early 1950s. The Optimist Club, now known as Optimist International, is a worldwide volunteer organization whose members work each day to make the future brighter by bringing out the best in children, in their communities, and in themselves. Doris talks about Sam's own personal incredible optimism.
The other one was his incredible optimism, which I am so grateful that I had as an inspiration in my life, because whatever happened, he would come up with something to make it okay. He used to say, the very worst thing, and Sandra and I talk about this because her father said the same thing. You can think something very bad has happened to you, but it might turn out to be the best thing that has ever happened to you, because you just don't know what lies ahead. So he would say, how can you question the map maker if you haven't seen the map? You don't know what the plan is. So just make the best of everything. Just do your best and make the best of everything, and it'll all come out okay.
In 1952, Sam was invited to be a speaker at the Optimist Club. One of the things he said in his speech was the 10 Commandments are fundamentally the basis of all laws, and how the world gets along depends on personal attitude toward those teachings. In 1953, Sam is pictured here in the newspaper as chairman of the Boys' Work Committee at the Optimist Club. In 1956, Sam becomes president of the Urban League of New Brunswick. Doris discusses how Sam always enjoyed doing for others.
And he just really enjoyed doing things that would benefit others. I mean, it was sincere. He did it for pleasure because it made him feel good. And to him, that's what was worth a lot more money. I mean, he wasn't a big eater. He wasn't a big boozer. He didn't want to do all these luxury things that we all do today. That wasn't important to him. They did some traveling, and he enjoyed the simple things in life. And he lived by his own standards, and he had very, very high standards. I think that's one of the reasons why he married my mother. He had a great deal of respect for her.
Now, here's a little bit about the Urban League of Greater New Brunswick. The Urban League of Greater New Brunswick was founded in 1945 for the purpose of providing social services to the area's Black community. For the first 20 years, the organization's focus was on getting Black people into schools and getting jobs. The organization still exists today and is now called the Civic League. Sam was the organization's president from 1956 to 1958 and served as a board member for many subsequent years. At that time, the Urban League of Greater New Brunswick was one of just 60 affiliates around the country of the National Urban League. And in late 1956, the National Urban League declared November 19th to be Equal Opportunity Day and announced that all of the affiliates would be cooperating together on this project. The date was chosen to mark the 93rd anniversary of President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and the Urban League recommended that all Americans give increased dedication to the concept of equal opportunity in American economic life. Sam, as president of the Greater New Brunswick organization, would have had a key role in this early civil rights event. Here we see a picture of Sam as presiding as president of the Urban League at their annual dinner. And Doris discusses how Sam managed to participate in so many activities and inspired her by example.
He'd come home for lunch a lot of times, and he'd come home for dinner every night, unless there was a big dinner. And then he'd go out again because he participated in so many different activities. But, it would be a meeting for an hour or whatever, and then he'd come home. He was inspirational to me as a dad by example of what a wonderful person he was. I mean, he used to go to Jamesburg where they had that delinquent boys, and he would just inspire them and spend time with them. I remember going with him a few times. He liked to make people happy and make their lives better. When we had time together, he would talk to me about important things, philosophical things on life, morals, and religion. And it was very inspirational in that regard. And he was a happy person. He was mostly in a good mood. He liked to tease and he liked to have fun. And
here we see Sam again at an Urban League dinner in 1958. And beginning in 1961, Sam was president of the United Negro College Fund in Middlesex County, and he held that role for many years. Here we see an article speaking about Sam as chairman of the United Negro College Fund in 1963. And here we see he was also a leader in the Rod and Gun Club. There is Sam pictured on the left in the 1957 article. And here in 1969, Sam is pictured as a past president of the Optimist Club. Cousin Barry marvels at how Sam had time for so much community service while he was still a full-time practicing attorney.
I can't imagine ever being involved in all those organizations and still being able to practice law.
But Sam was a practicing attorney during all this time in the late 40s, 50s, and 60s. In late 1947, Sam became a formal partner with attorney and longtime friend Lou Mezzi, and they opened a new office together. Sam and Lou had actually shared office space since 1929, but now they were partners as Adler and Mezzi. In 1948, the Mezzi family was involved in the startup of the Geico Insurance Company. Lou Mezzi's sister Shirley married an attorney named David Krieger. Krieger was the son of Jewish immigrants from Russia and grew up in Highland Park, New Jersey. In 1948, Krieger formed a group to buy a significant stake in a fledgling insurance company called Geico. Krieger went on to become chairman and CEO of Geico. Sam was offered an opportunity to buy into the new Geico group in 1948, but decided not to. Doris tells the story about Sam's decision not to invest at the very beginning of Geico.
Well, one of the big disappointments for him, and he probably didn't want to admit it, but he was the senior partner and founded the Adler law firm, and then he took in Lou Mezzi. My father, during his early career, was successful and had some big clients, you know, like that beautiful desk that your father had and that I have now. And I looked up Lady Kassam and I couldn't find her. And he said that she was a relative of the Roosevelts. She was very wealthy, and he invested in the stock market for her also. And she gave him the desk and then another piece, which is just a simple lithograph of boats, which I have up also, as a gift. When he moved to New Brunswick, started his law firm in New Brunswick, he took in Lou Mezzi. Lou Mezzi's brother-in-law and father-in-law were on the ground floor of Geico. They invited my father to get in on it. He had to borrow $100,000 in order to do so. That would have been easy for him, and Lou Mezzi borrowed $100. Other people involved did that. But my father always asked people's opinions that were experts. So he called my Aunt Lena, who was my mother's sister, her husband, Moshe Dickstein, who was one of the founders of Israel, by the way. It's a very interesting story. And he wrote a book on it. He asked him what he thought. And Moshe said, it can't work. It's not going to happen. I don't think you should do it. He had money. I think he was already married at the time. It was after the war, and he just didn't want to take the risk. We know that Geico did succeed, and these people became multimillionaires, which was big in those days. Very, very big. And my father loved the stock market, and he played it for the rest of his life, but never, I mean, he invested in Geico, obviously, but he didn't get that hit. And I think that was probably, I don't know if he would ever admit it, but I think that was probably his biggest disappointment.
Stanley also tells the story about Geico.
Lou Mezzi's brother-in-law, when he got out of the Army, 45 years later, he put a group together by government employees insurance out of bankruptcy. Lou Mezzi put up $100,000, and Sam, not because it's too risky, of course, that 100,000 turned into millions. Lou Mezzi's brother-in-law, the chairman of the board of government employees insurance. But anyway, like I said, he came out of the war, and 2 years later or so, him and a group bought this government employees insurance company out of bankruptcy. Now, he bought it in 47, 48, something like that. The next 10 years, it just went straight up.
In 1950, Sam and Lou Mezzi moved their office to Bayard Street in New Brunswick, where they stayed for the next couple of decades. In 1953, Sam won a very interesting case. He won back a man's business in court using some lawyerly theatrics. In 1953, Louis Panter, who had owned Panter Motor Sales Corporation, sold his business. And then he realized immediately that he had made a grave mistake. And he realized he should have never sold his business. So he hired Sam to try to get his business back. Stanley recalls watching the trial.
The Panter family owned an auto dealership in Perth Amboy. I've been in the family for 30, 40, a long time. And then the father, for some reason, decided to sell. So they found a buyer, they prepared the contract, executed the contract, and then he changes his mind. So guy sues him to enforce the contract. So they went to court, and they're having the summation to the jury. And Sam has a paper in his hand, and he says to the jury, he takes the piece of paper, puts it on the floor, and jumps up and down 2 or 3 times on it, picks up the paper and crumples it in his hand. And he says, this is a contract to sell. A man, his whole life is that business. So you're going to do something with this contract, it's a little crumpled piece of paper, for a man's life. So which is more important? He won the case. Funny thing was, I mean, took the piece of paper, put it on the ground, and jumped up and down 3 times. Then he picked up the paper and started squeezing it in his hands and pushing it around. And then he waves at the jury. This is a man's life.
What a great story. Here in 1957, we see Sam is pictured on the front page of the Home News. He's a court-appointed attorney for a man charged with murder, yet another murder case that Sam is defending. In 1959, Sam was elected as president of the Bar Association. And here we see Sam at New Brunswick Bar Association picnics in 1956 and in 1961. Stanley and Arlene had several opportunities to watch Sam in court in the 1950s and 60s. They recall his passion, his theatrical summations, and frequent biblical references as he spoke to the jury. Stanley recalls some of Sam's theatrical summations.
So Sam would invoke God in summations. I mean, he was, he went overboard. He was very theatrical. That's the only. He'd bring God into it. I don't remember power or anything. He started talking about God and this. I don't know. It's funny.
One time, Sam asked Stanley a question during a court recess, as Stanley recalls.
I went to one of his trials and I watched, and then it was a break for 10 minutes, and I went outside. I went out of the courtroom and sat down on the bench outside, and he comes walking along, and he says to me, "You think I was too theatrical?"
And Arlene also describes watching Sam in court.
So your father and I once went to a rape case. He gets in front of that courtroom. He is as fluent as could be. He has the command of the floor. He was a master at being a criminal lawyer. He was truly a master. We went on another case that wasn't a rape case. The way he conducted himself, the way he spoke, and he always spoke with such passion and so clearly and so strong. He was like magic in a courtroom.
Stanley recalls another time he watched Sam in court when Sam thought he had an agreement with the prosecutor on a time limit for summations.
Sam gave his summation to the jury. Now the prosecutor came in and started giving his to the jury. After a little while, Sam starts moving around in his seat, and then he hollered, Ed. The lawyer's name was Ed Dolan. And he's giving the summation, and Sam's saying, Ed. So finally, the lawyer turns around and, what do you want? He says, didn't we agree on 5 minutes maximum? No, we didn't agree on that. He says, yeah, we did out there. We said we only talked for 5 minutes. And then he turns around to the judge. He says, I lost my concentration. I remember that one.
And then in 1964, there was a sensational murder trial in which Sam was the defense counsel. For about 12 days, every day in the New Brunswick Home News, they covered the various trials and tribulations of this fascinating murder trial. And this will provide us a lot of insights into Sam's daily work as a defense counsel in a murder trial. First, the backstory. In 1963, Sam became the court-assigned attorney for David Big Slidey Walker, who was indicted for murder and was facing a death sentence if found guilty. On August 31, 1961, John King was stabbed to death in Edison, New Jersey. The case went unsolved for nearly 2 years. And then on July 18th, 1963, 18-year-old Maurice Chi-Chi Walker was picked up for a traffic violation in Newark. Chi-Chi startled police when he said, "I can tell you who killed the man in Edison 2 years ago." He went on to say that the murderer was his 23-year-old brother, David Big Slidey Walker. Big Slidey was arrested the next day and was indicted on July 26, 1963, and Sam was assigned by the court to be the defense counsel. On August 5th, 1963, Big Slidey pleaded innocent during his arraignment. Now, the story that got him arrested, his brother Chi-Chi's story, was that on August 31st, 1961, John King was looking for a good time, and King, Chi-Chi, Big Slidey, 2 other men, and 3 young girls drove off all together in a large station wagon from Newark to a secluded spot in Edison and drank wine. Chi-Chi told police that King started flashing money around, and that's when Big Slidey stabbed him to death. At the time of the arraignment in 1963, the prosecutors indicated that the 2 other male witnesses were dead, including a man named Aaron Williams, who had allegedly died in a gang fight. The trial did not begin until April 13th, 1964, in Middlesex County Criminal Court. Sam's opening remarks made the front page news. Now, due to the high-profile nature of the case, the jury was sequestered. In his opening remarks, Sam said, "They're trying the wrong man. The wrong man is on trial. This case is still unsolved. He is not guilty of killing this man." Sam also advised the jury to observe and study the younger brother, Chi-Chi, as he testifies. Sam said the jury will see that all the key witnesses slated to testify were friends of Chi-Chi. The next day, an Edison detective was on the stand who was involved in the arrest of Big Slidey. And he indicated that one of the girls, he said that Big Slidey had told him that one of the girls present on the night of the murder was the killer. Sam reinforced that the state was trying the wrong man for murder. He also indicated that Big Slidey had been beaten while in police custody in 1963. And Sam tried, but was unsuccessful in getting the detective to state that the brothers were unfriendly toward each other. On day 3 of the trial, Big Slidey's brother Chi-Chi is called to the stand as the principal state witness, and high drama ensued. Chi-Chi initially refused to take the oath when called to the witness stand. He said, "I don't take oaths." After a recess, he affirmed his intention to tell the truth, but he would not swear on the Bible. When he finally testified, Chi-Chi changed his story. On the witness stand, he departed from his 1963 sworn statement to the police, and he blamed Aaron Williams for the murder. Remember, Williams is one of the other witnesses who is believed to be dead. Chi-Chi's new story was that on the night of the murder, King made a pass at a girl named Faye Mitchell, one of the 3 girls in the car. Chi-Chi said that Aaron Williams then grabbed King around the neck, pulled out a knife, and stabbed him. In cross-examination by Sam, Chi-Chi admitted to using 7 different names and also to being a drug addict. Chi-Chi then baffles the prosecutors. The prosecutor pleaded surprise to the judge upon hearing Chi-Chi's new story and asked to re-cross-examine Chi-Chi as a hostile witness. The prosecutor then took Chi-Chi point by point through his sworn statement from July 1963. But Chi-Chi's answers to most questions was, "I can't remember a thing I said." Chi-Chi also said he didn't remember signing the 1963 statement accusing Big Slidey. Sam then cross-examined Chi-Chi, and Chi-Chi provided some odd answers to Sam as well. Sam reminded Chi-Chi of an interview that Sam had done with him before the trial. And then during the trial, they had this exchange. Sam, didn't you tell me that your brother had absolutely nothing to do with the murder? Chi-Chi, I'd be lying if I said that. Sam, isn't it true you're jealous of your brother because you're in love with his wife? Chi-Chi, that's personal. I may have mentioned jealousy, but not pertaining to them. Sam asked Chi-Chi why he made the original 1963 statement to the police accusing his brother Big Slidey of murder. And Chi-Chi replied, he made the statement to the police because he had been having a dispute with several members of his family at that time. Chi-Chi finished by placing the blame on the dead man, Aaron Williams. Day 4 of the trial provides more front page news as Chi-Chi changes his story again. Sam accused Chi-Chi of committing the murder himself, indicating that Faye Mitchell, who King had made advances on, was in fact Chi-Chi's girlfriend at the time. Chi-Chi, responding to Sam, said, "You're going to be sorry," and then pointed to his brother Big Slidey and said, "That man there stabbed John King. Everybody in the car saw him." Sam then read a letter written 3 months earlier from Chi-Chi to Big Slidey's wife. In the letter, Chi-Chi expressed regret for accusing his brother Big Slidey. He wrote to Big Slidey's wife, "I said it all because I was mad at you and him." Chi-Chi also wrote in the letter that he was jealous because she had married Big Slidey. Day 5 brings another astonishing twist in the trial. Witness Aaron Williams is alive. Each side thought that Williams could be a star witness for them, and Williams was arrested in Newark as a material witness for the prosecution and held in the Middlesex County Jail with $10,000 bail. Meanwhile, during the day at the courthouse, Sam cross-examined Faye Mitchell and read a statement that Mitchell had provided to a private investigator that Sam had hired in February. That statement said that on the day of the murder, Chi-Chi had asked her to help in a scheme to rob John King. Sam tried to get Mitchell to say that Chi-Chi committed the murder, but Mitchell stuck to her story that Big Slidey had committed the murder. Day 6 is front page news again as the dead man, Aaron Williams, testifies. Under questioning by the prosecutor, Aaron Williams initially accused Big Slidey of the murder. But under cross-examination, it was revealed that Sam's private investigator had actually interviewed Williams before the trial, and Williams had pinned the murder on Chi-Chi. But on the stand, Williams agreed with his earlier statement to Sam's private investigator and also said all the girls in the car were so drunk they had to be carried at the murder scene, thus questioning their ability to recall the events. On day 7, a series of witnesses came to the stand, all accusing Big Slidey, but each had a different story. And their stories all differed from statements they had made to Sam's private investigator before the trial. In those statements, they had indicated that they had not seen Big Slidey stab John King. At this point, we have to wonder who actually committed this murder. But we know one thing. Sam must have been certain that Big Slidey had not done it. Doris talks about how Sam never defended someone he thought was guilty.
My father, he was the most moral person I have ever met, and the most moral person anyone has ever met. So he would never have it in his heart to be able to put his efforts into defending someone that he thought was guilty. Never.
On day 8, Big Slidey takes the stand. As the newspaper said, Big Slidey was neatly dressed, polite to a fault, and not once did the defendant raise his voice. On the stand, Big Slidey characterized his brother Chi-Chi as a thief and a pimp and accused him of the murder. He said Chi-Chi was angered when John King tried to rape Faye Mitchell. In a dramatic claim of his innocence and at complete odds with how his brother Chi-Chi handled the oath, Big Slidey picked up the Bible from the edge of the witness stand, held it up, and said, "I believe in the Bible. I'm telling you the truth, Mr. Adler, so help me God." Sam also introduced an unsigned statement made by Big Slidey accusing his brother of the murder. This statement had been made 4 days after he was arrested in July 1963 while he was in police custody. But Big Slidey never signed that statement because he said he had been beaten by police in the Middlesex County Jail. He said he was taken to a windowless room and hit with books, a rubber hose, and a baseball bat, all in an attempt to make him admit to the murder. Sam also called Big Slidey and Chi-Chi's 2 other brothers to the stand on this day. Both of the brothers said that in 1961, after seeing the newspaper reports of the murder, Chi-Chi bragged about killing the man for messing with Faye. The trial closes finally on April 24th with the attorney's summation. Sam's closing remarks included, "I'm certain if you find this man guilty, your conscience will not be clear." Sam concentrated his attack on Chi-Chi and Aaron Williams as described in the Home News, which read, "Drawing from the Bible, the defense counsel, Sam, likened Maurice to Cain, who slew his brother for the same reason that Chi-Chi Walker wanted to blame his own brother for something he did himself." Adler, his voice dripping with contempt, called Williams a Judas Iscariot who lied to save his own life. He also branded Williams a liar, fearful of his own stinking hide. The defense attorney, who said the inconsistencies in the witness's story were so numerous, it would take hours to list them. He called the state's proofs a case of confusion. The day closed with the judge providing instructions to the jury. A guilty verdict delivers an automatic death penalty. And then, a day later, Sam wins the case as the newspaper runs a banner headline on Sunday, April 26th, 1964. In the article, the second paragraph reads, "Moments after the 9 men and 3 women found Walker innocent of the vicious Edison murder 2.5 years ago of 40-year-old John King, Walker hugged his defense counsel, Samuel Adler, a New Brunswick lawyer." Sam never defended someone he believed was guilty, although in this interesting case of the stolen watch, he seems to have been deceived by the defendant. Doris tells a funny story about the case of the stolen watch.
He had this guy, brought him into court. He was accused of stealing a watch. So my father presented his case. The judge, my father was very pleased. The judge said, "Okay, you're acquitted." The guy, another black guy, he said he had these gold teeth and he smiled. He goes, "Oh my gosh, does that mean I have to give the watch back, Your Honor?" He was guilty, but he never told my father the truth. He didn't know what it meant when the judge said, "You're acquitted." He didn't know that acquitted meant you're off the hook. But my father loved the story because, he said the guy was such a good actor. He had me convinced that he didn't steal the watch and that he didn't have it. I think he believed in the people that he represented so much that the jury looked into his eyes and into his actions, and they believed him because he believed it. And he was so sincere and honest that you could feel it and see it. And so they believed him.
Sam prided himself on honesty. He felt that the reason he won all 12 of his murder trials and many other cases was that he was able to gain the trust of the jury. Barry discusses one reason Sam was so successful in court is that he spoke honestly to the jury.
No, just about what he told me about, how to deal with juries and how to really be straight with them, because the juries could see that. I mean, they could understand, or they could feel what Sam was telling them. They would just be able to know that, when he said it, and the way that he said it, and the way that he handled himself, that what he said was, the honest to God truth. And that was just his personality. And that was his moral compass. Absolutely.
Doris discusses how Sam was honest to his core.
The one thing I can assure you of was that he was honest to his core and moral to his core. And he was very, very staunch on that. Never lie. You can never lie. Never tell a lie.
And Doris goes on to tell of Sam's credo.
My word is my bond. That's what he would say. My word is my bond.
And Barry describes a little more about Sam as a moral man who believed in honesty.
He was a very moral man. He really believed in honesty.
Now, the last article that I can find where Sam is in court as an attorney, as a defense attorney, is on the one hand, a little bit of a sad one, because his honesty is actually challenged by a witness. And Sam feels a deep need to defend himself. I wonder, though, if Sam ever realized that the article that appeared the next day actually provided him with this amazing opportunity to have a lasting testimony on record as to how much honesty mattered to him. I want to read the article so you can understand what happened. So a patrolman, a police officer, is on the stand in a drunk driving case. And the article says, a New Brunswick policeman testified today in municipal court that the defense counsel, which would be Sam, in a drunken driving case, asked him to drop the charge. You asked me to drop the complaint because the defendant has 8 children, Patrolman Joseph DeBonis said during cross-examination by New Brunswick lawyer Samuel Adler. Adler then told Judge Meyer Cohn, it's a misstatement and a lie. The attorney went on to say that as a member of the bar for 40 years, this is the first time his honor has been challenged in court. The judge informed the lawyer that the policeman's comments have no bearing on the case. So, and Sam probably knew that, but Sam felt so slighted that he wanted it on record that he had never lied in court. Barry discusses how Sam must have felt about this incident.
I can appreciate Sam's word was his bond. And for someone to challenge the fact that he lied must have, I can imagine how that made him feel. I can just appreciate it. I can just understand how, based upon the way that he lived, for someone to say that to him and to someone to question his word would be a shanda.
And that concludes part 4. Coming soon, part 5, retirement and legacy. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed part 4. Please contact me with your feedback. Goodbye now.